Charlotte.
I'm 27 years old. I've no money and no prospects. I'm already a burden to my parents. And I'm frightened. So don't judge me, Lizzie. Don't you dare judge me.
The first time I watched Pride and Prejudice, I thought Charlotte Lucas had completely lost the plot. She willingly married Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, yes, this man, this one you're seeing right here. A man whose greatest passion in life appears to be talking about Lady Catherine de Bourgh and making every room just a little more uncomfortable than it was before he entered it. I could not, for the life of me, understand why anyone would voluntarily sign up for that. But Pride and Prejudice is one of those films that changes depending on who you are when you watch it. Every few years, I come back to it and find myself sympathizing with someone new. First, it was Mr. Darcy. Then, rather unexpectedly, it was Mrs. Bennet. And now I think it might just be Miss Charlotte Lucas. Because the older I get, the less I ask why Charlotte married Mr. Collins, and the more I ask what exactly she stood to gain by refusing him. I think that's the wrong question we've all been asking. We look at Charlotte's decision as though she's choosing between Mr. Collins and true love, but Charlotte isn't choosing between those two things at all. She's choosing between security and uncertainty, between having a home of her own and continuing to live as a dependent in someone else's home. Once you start looking at it from that perspective, her decision becomes far less shocking and maybe a little more heartbreaking. One of the cleverest things Jane Austen does is place Charlotte and Elizabeth in almost identical situations while quietly reminding us that they are not living the same life. On the surface, they receive the same proposal from the same man. It feels like a simple comparison. Elizabeth says no, Charlotte says yes, case closed. Except it isn't. Elizabeth has things Charlotte doesn't. She's younger, she's considered prettier, she's endlessly witty, and perhaps most importantly, she still has time. Even if she doesn't realize it herself, Elizabeth has the luxury of believing that another opportunity may come along. She can afford to reject a man she doesn't respect because she still has reason to hope life might present another option. Charlotte doesn't seem to share that hope. And not because she's pessimistic, quite the opposite actually. I think Charlotte is the only person who has looked at her circumstances without romanticizing them. She isn't being dramatic when she tells Elizabeth she has no money and no prospects. She's simply stating the facts as she understands them. In Regency England, a woman without fortune who remained unmarried into her late 20s wasn't just waiting a little longer for love. She was watching her options quietly disappear. That's what makes the conversation between Charlotte and Elizabeth so painful. They're both intelligent women, but they're solving completely different problems. Elizabeth is asking herself, could I ever love this man? Charlotte is asking, how do I avoid becoming a lifelong burden to my family? Neither question is unreasonable, but they naturally lead to very different answers. I think Charlotte's defining quality is that she never mistakes the world she wishes existed for the world she actually inhabits. Elizabeth spends much of the story challenging society's expectation, and rightly so. It's one of the reasons we love her. She refuses to marry for convenience alone, she questions social conventions, and she has an admirable confidence in her own judgment. Charlotte, however, recognizes that refusing to play by the rules doesn't make the rules disappear. I don't think she particularly likes the system she's living under. There's certainly nothing to suggest she believes it's fair. But she also understands that fairness has very little to do with whether she'll have somewhere to live in 10 years' time. People often criticize Charlotte as though she lacks romance. I don't think that's true. I think she simply refuses to let romance be the only thing informing one of the biggest decisions of her life. Love is wonderful, but it doesn't guarantee security. Affection is lovely, but it doesn't pay the bills. Charlotte isn't rejecting the idea of love. She's acknowledging that, for women in her position, survival often has to come first. It's an uncomfortable idea because Elizabeth eventually gets both love and security. Charlotte never expects that possibility though. She makes peace with the choices actually available to her, not the ones she would ideally like to have. Charlotte's practicality extends well beyond her own life. I actually think she's one of the sharpest observers of the people in the entire film. Early on, she's the one who tells Elizabeth that Jane's reserved nature could easily be misunderstood. Jane feels deeply, but she doesn't wear her emotions on her sleeve, and Charlotte worries that Bingley might mistake her quietness for indifference. Whether we like hearing it or not, Charlotte has a point. As it happens, Mr. Darcy reaches exactly the same conclusion, albeit with considerably less tact and significantly more interference. Anyway, Charlotte also notices Darcy's growing interest in Elizabeth long before Elizabeth is prepared to admit anything herself. She watches people carefully, and because she isn't swept away by romance or prejudice, she's often able to see situations with surprising clarity. It's ironic, really. The woman who's so often accused of lacking romance is perhaps the person who understands human nature best. I also think Charlotte forces us to recognize something about Elizabeth that we don't often talk about. Elizabeth is privileged. Not financially, of course, the Bennet situation is precarious enough, but Elizabeth possesses a different kind of privilege. She has beauty, intelligence, confidence, and charm. People are naturally drawn to her. Even Mr. Darcy, despite declaring she was not handsome enough to tempt him, spends the rest of the film proving himself to be an absolutely unreliable narrator on that particular front. Charlotte doesn't have that advantage. She doesn't expect a wealthy gentleman to suddenly realize she's the love of his life. She doesn't expect life to surprise her. Elizabeth can afford certain principles because she has reason to believe they'll eventually be rewarded. Charlotte has no such guarantee. I think that's why judging the two women by the same standard feels a little unfair. Elizabeth is making decisions from a position of hope. Charlotte is making them from a position of, quite frankly, necessity. Which brings us to the question everyone always asks. Was Charlotte happy? Personally, I don't think that's quite the right question. Was she deliriously in love with Mr. Collins? Almost certainly not. Was she content with the life she'd built? I think the film quietly suggests that she was. Charlotte never expected a fairy tale. She expected stability, independence, and respectability. And by the end of the story, she has all three. It's not the life Elizabeth would choose, and Charlotte knows that, but that's rather the point. She isn't trying to live Elizabeth's life. She's trying to make the best of her own. There's something deeply admirable about that. In my opinion, settling gets a bad rap. We all have this idealistic goal in our mind and are convinced that anything short of it is automatically a miserable life. Through Charlotte, we see a person who refuses to waste her life mourning possibilities that were never realistically within reach in the first place. And that's why Charlotte Lucas becomes more interesting to me every time you revisit Pride and Prejudice, because she challenges the way we instinctively think about happy endings. Elizabeth gets the romance, Jane gets the sweetheart, Lydia gets Wickham, and we'll save that catastrophe for another day. Charlotte gets something quieter. She gets security, she gets independence, she gets a home. None of those things make for particularly swoon-worthy cinema, but they mattered enormously in her world. And perhaps that's why her words stay with me more than they used to. I'm 27 years old, I have no money and no prospects. The first time I heard that line, it sounded to me like some kind of excuse, like, "Fam, get out of my face." Now, it sounds like a woman who has looked her circumstances squarely in the face and made the best decision she believed was available to her. You don't have to agree with Charlotte. Elizabeth clearly doesn't. But I think the story asks us to do something much more interesting than agree. It asks us to understand. And somehow, more than 200 years after Jane Austen first introduced Charlotte Lucas, we're still having that conversation. Love or security or it's still at the tip of our tongues in the everyday of our lives. And I'd say that's a rather good indication that she knew exactly what she was doing.